Chapter 17. A Mysterious Death. The Hugh Owen Library was situated on Aberystwyth University's Penglais campus. A phone call confirmed they had permission for access to Mathew's thesis, provided they could show some ID when they arrived. The two detectives headed up to E-floor with the precious book, which the helpful librarian had dug out for them. She said they could use one of the two carrel rooms available, as it was presently vacant. They just needed to take in an extra chair. "You know, we probably could have just requested a copy," Debbie commented, a little out of puff after the stairs. Yvonne gazed across at the views from the windows, which stretched right over the town to the sea. The students seated at the desks had their heads down. She guessed they must be so used to seeing such sights they no longer paused to watch. "I like to put myself into a place," the DI tilted her head. "Feel what the victim may have felt. See the things they saw. It helps understand them a little better." Debbie smiled and took an extra chair from the main room and followed the DI into the carrel room. Yvonne placed the precious thesis on the table. For a few moments they simply stared at it, each in their own way, paying silent homage to the young man who had made such a promising start and lost his life off a cliff. A young man whose work they hoped would bring answers, and if not, ideas. The title read Cryptocurrency, Algorithms and the Potential for Criminal Activity. Debbie's lips pressed into a tight line as he pushed the tome towards the DI. Her fingers were gentle, almost reverent, as she teased open the introductory pages. "To my parents, with love," she read the dedication aloud, "and my thanks to Dr. Carl Caranta, whose guidance has been invaluable during this process." "Doesn't sound like someone about to top himself," Debbie murmured. The DI had deep furrows along her forehead. He was researching cryptocurrency, in connection with criminal use. If someone did harm him, perhaps it was due to something he had uncovered, or something he knew. She tapped her pen on her open palm. "We have a rogue group kidnapping children and demanding ransom in Bitcoin. At least one of their snatch vehicles is registered to this dead young man, and he was working with Carantan and researching cryptocurrency and crime. Did he uncover something that put him in danger?" Debbie rubbed his stubble. "Mathew, in the same department as Carantan, who owns the flats to which our ghost vehicle is registered." Yvonne nodded. "It feels like too many coincidences. I'd like to speak to Carl Carantan again." They flipped through the pages of graphs and explanations and conclusions. There was a whole chapter on the dark web. The DI took several pictures with her mobile, of bits she wanted to peruse later. As they were about to leave the library, Yvonne noticed the fair-haired, well-muscled young man she had met the day she went to see Carantan. He was examining his own reflection in one of the large windows. About to duck out, she could feel the embarrassment rising up her face and neck. When he spotted her, he rose from his seat. "Debbie, can you wait for me at the car?" Yvonne flicked her DS an apologetic look. "Sorry." Debbie looked across at the approaching lad and raised his eyebrows. Yvonne pulled a face and Debbie grinned before doing as he had been asked. The DI took a deep breath. "Hi." She held out her hand as confidently as she could. "Mike, isn't it?" "You remembered." He gave her an open-mouthed smile, full of fluoride white teeth. "Mike Jones, and you are—" He shook her hand firmly. "Yvonne. Yvonne Giles." She retracted her hand and placed it on the handle of her shoulder bag. He screwed up his eyes. "Did you decide to rent the flat? What are you doing here?" "I came to look at this." She held up Mathew Hinds' thesis. Mike stared at it, before his eyes went back to her face. "Why did you want to read someone's thesis?" "And someone who is no longer here?" He shook his head, as though confused and horrified at the same time. Yvonne sighed, crossing her arms over the book which she now held to her chest. "I'm going to level with you, Mike. I'm a police officer." His pupils widened, and he opened his mouth, as though to say something, but nothing came out. "Did you know Mathew Hinds? Did you ever meet him?" Mike nodded. "I knew him briefly. I met him when I was doing my third-year undergraduate project with Carantan's research group." "Look, this isn't really the place for a conversation. Can we go for a coffee?" "Sure." Yvonne thought of Debbie waiting in the car. "I can't be long, though. We have a lot on." Fine, we'll nip over to the Arts Centre. They do a great coffee there and we'll be able to talk. Once seated, with a view over the town to the sea, Yvonne blew on a latte and waited for Mike to finish examining his own reflection again and elaborate. My project was part of a degree course, contributing a sizable portion towards the final degree mark. Mathew was in his first year as a postdoc. Postdoc? So he already had a PhD? Yes, and he was employed as a postdoctoral research assistant. He was effectively in charge of seeing me through my project. Of course, we had guidance from Carentan. He directed the research, but the day-to-day running of the group was really done by Mathew. Were you working with him when he killed himself? He closed his eyes as though remembering. Yes. Did you suspect anything was wrong? I thought he had been out of sorts for a couple of weeks before it happened. He rubbed his neck. In what way? He'd been acting secretive and stopped socializing with us. Did you ask him about it? Mike shrugged. No, from what I knew of him, he liked to keep himself private. Even when a few of us went for a drink after work, he never really opened up. If he did, it was only ever in general terms, maybe about something his mum had said, or something he was doing at home, or going to see his parents. Was he dating? Yvonne sipped her drink, noticing that Mike had yet to touch his. Mike hesitated. Yvonne tried again. Did he ever mention a girl? No, Mike exhaled noisily. Isn't that a little unusual? He was spending a lot of time with Carentan, Mike blurted. With Carentan? Yvonne frowned. I don't understand. Wait, are you implying he was seeing his professor? Mike wobbled his head from side to side. It's what I strongly suspected at the time. The GI took a few moments to digest this possible new connection. Isn't that frowned upon by the university? Sure, but it happens, he shrugged. Carentan is married too. I don't think his wife has any idea. Is he gay? Mike nodded vigorously. Or bisexual, anyway. Is he out? Only to a select few. If you thought they were having a relationship, did you wonder if he had anything to do with Mathew's death? Mike shrugged. I don't know. Who can say what it is that drives people to suicide? Her eyes narrowed. The coroner returned an open verdict. That tells me he wasn't sure that it was suicide. Mike took several slugs of his coffee, then sat with two hands around the mug, gazing into its contents. I wouldn't know about that. He stayed, shoulders hunched. He had shrunken into himself. Yvonne stared at his bent head, deep in thought for a few seconds before making an excuse to leave. He had given her food for thought. Ideas swam around her head, needing time and space. Debbie tapped the steering wheel with his fingers, sighing every few seconds. Yvonne spotted him before he spotted her. Sorry. She hurried round to the passenger side. I just had a very interesting chat with one of Carentan's postgraduate students. She settled in, fastening her seatbelt. Callum's just been in touch. Debbie's face was unusually solemn. Yvonne screwed up hers. Was I that long? He's got a copy of the coroner's report into Mathew Hinds' death. He fired up the engine. And yeah, you were that long. Oh. Yvonne stared out of her window until they were out of Aberystwyth and on the road back to Newtown. I can't wait to get stuck into that report. Do you want to hear about my conversation with Mike Jones? Debbie swung a brief look at her. Sure, I'd love to. Can I nip into the next shop before we go for a sandwich? Yvonne put a hand up to her mouth, her eyes round in her face. Oh, Debbie, I'm sorry. Lunch. You've had no lunch. She grinned at him. No wonder you're grumpy. My bad. Let's stop and get some sandwiches to take back. You must be starving. Debbie smiled, his eyes twinkling. I thought you'd never notice. An hour, 2 packs of sandwiches, and an interesting conversation later, and they were back at the station. Callum was waiting for them. He handed the DI a wad of paper in a cardboard jacket. The coroner's report, ma'am. Makes for interesting reading. She took it to her desk and sat to peruse it fully. Callum and Debbie pulled up some chairs. They studied the damage marked on the diagram of Mathew's front and back. Mathew had sustained extensive bruising and broken bones in the fall. He had hemorrhaged internally and likely died simultaneous to or very quickly after hitting the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. The coroner had ringed bruising to the neck and throat area and scribbled unexplained by the fall. Yvonne put both her hands on top of her head, looking up at the ceiling as she organised her thoughts. Was the bruising to the neck the reason for the open verdict? She put her eyes down again and continued working her way through. The coroner suggested the bruising might indicate the involvement of another in Matthew's death, but he went on to say that he could not rule out Matthew having tried hanging himself prior to jumping off the cliff. That sort of thing has been known before, Callum pursed his lips. Dewi sighed. I feel sorry for his parents. Their son and their happiness gone in one horrific moment, and no satisfactory explanation. How do you recover from that? Quite. The DI's eyes glazed over. She pictured the cliff and Matthew's last seconds, and kept seeing another figure. She could not shake the feeling there had been two people atop that cliff. She voiced her thoughts. But Matthew had everything to live for. It was less than a year after he had completed his PhD thesis. He had a very important position in Carentan's research group. Why would he throw all that away? Do you think his death is linked to Carentan? The affair that Mike Jones suspected? Yvonne rubbed her chin. What if Matthew had threatened to expose the affair? Carentan would have been disgraced, possibly losing his position at the university and his wife into the bargain. True, Dewi nodded, but perhaps Carentan had tried to end it with Matthew, worried he could lose everything, and Matthew couldn't handle it. Or Matthew discovered something else in the course of the work for his thesis, maybe criminal activity for which he paid with his life. This is all very well, but Callum injected a dose of current reality to the discussion. There is a vile group abducting children and holding them to extort money. Some of those children are from our patch. If Matthew's death is not linked to the abductors, we are wasting precious time. You're right, Callum. Yvonne bit down on the end of her pen. I'm making links because of the ghost vehicle. We must keep in mind that this is only one line of inquiry. I hope to catch up with the SOCA officers as soon as possible, find out what they are up to. They have been awfully quiet.